Can you see his face? In the 20th chapter of the book of Numbers, can you see the face of Moses? Because it's red. It is high alert. I've had it up to here, cheeks flushed, eyes on the cusp of rage. I've had enough. That's what his face looks like by the time we get to the 20th chapter of the book of Numbers. Now that is not how Moses has normally looked. You, thanks to the young people, you know the story of the Exodus, where God called Moses to stand before the king, Pharaoh himself, and say those famous words, "Pharaoh, Pharaoh, let my people go." And it happened. It took some time. It took 10 plagues to be exact, but eventually Pharaoh relented. God's people packed up their belongings, whatever they could carry on their shoulders, and with smiles on their faces, they walked out of Egypt. God heard their cries, God saved them, and it was glorious. Until Pharaoh had a change of heart. Pharaoh summoned his chariot and chariot drivers and said, "Go take care of them. Once and for all, if they can't be my slaves, I can't have them exist in the world." So the armies of Egypt came bearing down on the Hebrew people, who moments before had smiles on their faces, and now they turned to Moses. And they blamed him. "Moses, Moses, were there no graves in the land of Egypt that you brought us out here to die in the wilderness?" And what did Moses do? The picture of divine leadership. This is exactly what God expected. Moses turns, he prays to God. God promises he's going to respond. Moses tells the people, "Do not be afraid, stand up, and you will see the Lord's deliverance." Next thing you know, Moses is raising his arms up in the air. The waters are being torn apart. A pillar of fire sets a boundary between the Egyptians and the Hebrews. God's people walk across dry ground. God saves them, and it is glorious. Part of the Exodus that people don't know about what happens next is, of course, because of the glory of God has been revealed, they celebrate. Moses starts singing. I think he was a baritone. I don't know that for sure. But he begins to sing. Miriam chimes in, his older sister, much better voice, sings for a longer time. She actually gets out the tambourine. It's a party for the Hebrew people. Why? Because they've witnessed the glory of God. Everything is going great. We're about this long in the Bible. And after this long, you know what happens? Somebody turns to Moses and begins to pull on his arm. You can just imagine. You've seen a kid do that to a mom or dad. "Mom, mom, mom, mom." And you see the face of the mother, the father just grow more and more red, trying to pretend to be patient, trying to pretend like this is not annoying. That's what they're doing to Moses. Moses, Moses. We're thirsty, Moses. There's water over here, but it's bitter. So Moses takes a deep breath. Because that's what leaders do. He takes a deep breath, says, "I got this." He goes and he prays, and next thing you know, God saves him. God takes the bitter water, and God makes it sweet. God saves him, and guess what? It is glorious. All right? Do you hear a pattern? In the Bible, that lasts exactly one verse. One verse. The glory of God is revealed, and one verse later, what is happening? The Hebrew people are coming up to Moses yet again. "Moses, Moses, Moses, we're hungry. There's nothing to eat out here." What does Moses do? He takes a deep breath, prays to God, comes back, says, "God's got it." The next day, Hebrew people wake up, there's manna all over the ground. This flaky white substance that they gather together in order to make bread out of it, a flat bread, something to sustain them. And what is it? God saves them, and it is glorious. Now, we could go on with this pattern, all right? We would be here all day. Here's what you need to know. In the wilderness, God saves God's people from thirst, from hunger, from snakes, from foreign armies, from hunger again, from thirst again, from hunger when they're sick of manna. Now God gives them meat to eat. It's on and on and on. It's always the same. They complain to poor Moses. Moses turns to God. God responds. God saves them, and it is glorious. That happens over and over again, but friends, it's been 40 years. been 40 years. Moses, he's tired. All right? He's heard it all. He was wondering why these people can't figure out some of their own problems, right? Can't solve something yourself. Maybe he's worn out. In addition, his sister Miriam has just passed away. He's worn out, he's tired, he's grieving. All right, I'm trying to justify what Moses is going to do next, because all of a sudden the Hebrew people come up to him again. Moses, pulling on his hand, his shirt sleeve. We're thirsty. Why have you brought us out to this land? It would have been better if our kindred would have died in Egypt. You hear that? This is not even the first generation yet. This is the second generation. The first generation walked with Moses. Now he is listening to the complaints of their children and their grandchildren. Think about putting up with this for 40 years. They say to Moses, this land, it's no good. There's no figs, there's no vines, there's not enough water to drink. Moses, there's not even any pomegranates around. You hear that? The first generation, they were worried that Pharaoh would put them to death at a moment's notice. The second generation, they're worried about pomegranates. All right? It's not exactly the same thing. You understand why Moses might be a little annoyed, but Moses takes a deep breath. He gets his brother Aaron. They go to talk to God, to the tent of the meeting where the Ark of the Covenant is placed. They go, they have this interaction with God. God says, pick up the staff, probably Aaron's staff. From an earlier story, he picks up Aaron's staff, the rod. He comes outside, and God was very clear. Moses, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go and you're going to gather the people together, and when the whole assembly, when all of Israel is together, you turn and you speak to this rock. All right, now this feels a little strange, but this speak to the rock, and the water is going to flow out of the rock. This is how you're going to provide for them. This is how they are going to see my glory. This is how I'm going to deliver it. It's going to be glorious, Moses. So Moses goes out. Moses goes out and gathers all the Hebrew people together, but remember, he's been putting up with this stuff for 40 years. And he gathers them all together. What's he supposed to do? He's supposed to speak to the rock. Moses doesn't speak to the rock. Instead, you know who Moses speaks to? He speaks to the people. He turns around, and by the way, it's not a well done, good and faithful servants sort of speech. He begins to yell at them. You sinners, you rebels. And then he says, with, I imagine his eyes kind of ablaze, do you want to see the glory of God? It's not a, hey, would you like to see the glory of God? It's a, do you want to see the glory of God? I'll show you the glory of God. All of a sudden people start to cringe. Moses takes the rod. He's supposed to speak to the rock, right? He said, you want to see the glory of God? He takes that rod and he just hits that rock. Just not once, but just twice. He hammers it as strong as he possibly can. Next thing you know, water flows out of the rock. The Hebrew people begin to drink. There's enough for them, for their livestock. It is almost glorious. Some of you were with me. You said glorious. Good. Almost. It's glorious for the Hebrew people. Do you know why it's not glorious for everyone? The very next verse. God says to Moses, because you did not trust me. Because you did not trust me to reveal my glory. Because you did not listen and do what I said. Moses, you will not be going into the promised land. This is huge, friends. Think about this. Moses has walked through the waters of the Red Sea. For the last 40 years, he has been wandering through the wilderness. Why? Because the Hebrew people are going to the promised land, to the land promised to Abraham and Sarah. They're on the cusp of it. They can almost see it. They're just about there. He's been walking in this direction for 40 years, and now suddenly God says, no, Moses, you're not going to be making that last trip. The whole goal, you will not be part of the destination. Does that seem unfair to you? Does that seem a little harsh? If it seems unfair to you, you are in really good company this morning. Actually, I'll take that back. I don't know if you're in good company, you're in my company. All right? It feels like that's a pretty harsh judgment from God towards Moses. But the reason, this is debatable, but the reason I think God makes this pronouncement is because God knows the anger he saw in Moses. God knows that wrath, how powerful and how dangerous it is. How dangerous it is to an individual and how dangerous it is to a community. Because anger, wrath, it is contagious. Wrath is one of the 7 deadly sins. This is week 7, we have covered the 7 deadly sins. Today, we close by talking about wrath. And the power of wrath is that it is both contagious, it is also so easy to justify. And I can prove it. If you get angry at something, you know what you can always say, well, Jesus got angry, right? What would Jesus do? WWJD? Jesus got Palm Sunday, some of you remember the story. Jesus goes to the temple, turns over the tables. Jesus had witnessed injustice. So he rose up in divine anger, divine retribution. He changed the things. He was angry about the system. And so when we get angry, there is a temptation to think that's what we're doing. We're standing up to injustice. We're speaking the truth to power. Good for us, right? That's what wrath wants us to think. Here's the problem. Most of the time, the first time we hit that rock, the first time we let anger flow through us, the first time it might be about injustice in the world, maybe even the second time. You know what happens? You keep hitting that rock long enough, you keep letting anger flow through you, it's no longer about injustice. Eventually, you're just complaining about pomegranates, right? About little things that frankly don't really matter. It's about us and not about the world. That's the power of wrath. And that, friends, is contagious. When we planned out this sermon series, we did not have a master plan to make sure we got the wrath on week 7. We really did not. But it is fitting, isn't it? Because we see this all the time in our community, in our country, and in our world. We see it in the news. We see it in every corner of social media. We experience it maybe around the kitchen table. We read about it in the paper. We hear this wrath. We see this anger. And the temptation is to think, you know how we win? You know how we overcome it? We raise our voices. We get louder than the next loudest person. We make our point more emphatically. That's what we do. Just get angrier and angrier and angrier. And eventually, that anger becomes contagious. And it just keeps ratcheting up. That's the power of wrath. When Moses does it, God taps him on the shoulder and says, Moses, I love you. Always have, always will, but you're done. When it's time to go into the promised land, it'll be Joshua, not Moses, who leads them. Why? Because God knows the power of anger ratcheting up, it'll destroy the entire community. The temptation is to think that that's the only way to move forward. But along comes Jesus, who shows us another way, the way of love and compassion that he demonstrates throughout his ministry. The way of love and compassion. Instead of hearing a neighbor we disagree with and suddenly jumping on them, instead it is to love that person, to hear what they have to say, to ask questions, and to understand more fully. Yes, it still means confessing what we believe to be true, but it's done in a very, very different manner. That's the way of Jesus. And I've seen this happen. There are 1,000 different examples. They are not as colorful. They're certainly not as thrilling as hitting the proverbial rock, but I've seen this happen. The most telling example for me, just for me, is, as some of you know, I'm from southeastern Iowa, right? Okay. If you want to talk about the Iowa Hawkeye game, we'll talk afterwards, okay? I can't take all those questions right now about the defense, all right? No. So I'm from southeastern Iowa, a little town called Montezuma. In in the last year, really in the last 10 years, the biggest news story in my community was tragic. Some of you remember the story of Molly Tibbetts from this summer, the University of Iowa student who went missing. Eventually her body was found in a cornfield. The body was found in Brooklyn, or outside of Brooklyn. That is about 8 miles from my hometown. The courthouse where the case began to be tried, anyway, is about 4 blocks from my house. Molly's aunt is a good family friend of ours. So because of this, I did not know Molly, but I know people around this community quite well. And so when it began to play out, I started to follow this story, frankly, probably a little too closely. And what I was taken aback by, there's 2 big impressions. First is that as the truth of this situation unfolded, I was horrified at people from very different perspectives, who were even arguing, in some cases arguing with one another, but how easily that they could reach out and grab a hold of this young woman's tragic story and co-opt it, and try to use it as a talking point to further their agenda. Whatever that agenda might be, everybody was reaching out saying, see, this is what I have learned from the story. And it was just full of anger and vitriol. On the other hand, I listened as her family responded in a much different way. And this is a family who has experienced real loss, right? These are parents who have lost. This is a dad who lost his child. This is every parent's worst nightmare. And I thought, if there's anybody who could stand up and to speak with wrath, if there's anybody who could righteous anger just flow from them and just let everybody have it, it would be this family. And instead, I have watched this father stand up and speak with love and compassion. And I've seen how that has changed people, little by little. I have witnessed as other members of this family, including Molly's aunt, respond and even testify, say, this is how we have seen God, Jesus at work in the midst of this tragic situation. They have responded with love and compassion. And little by little, that has changed the community and the lives of the people that I know quite well. It is indeed possible that in the midst of our world where it feels like everything always wants to escalate one after another, it is possible to respond with love and compassion. And here's the truth, people of God. Our community, our country, our world, we have enough righteous or unrighteous anger, right? Can we all agree on that? What the world really needs from the followers of Jesus Christ is more love and more compassion. And the promise of God is if we pour out love and compassion in our own little corners of the world, that there is one who will take that little bit of love, that little bit of compassion, however imperfect they might be, and he will take that and say, you know what, I can take it from here. And God will do something extraordinary. God will do something bigger than we can possibly imagine. You might even say that, my God, through your compassion and your love, that God will do something glorious in the lives